show you guys some things about applying paint, and that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And in doing so, you kind of have to consider three things. That is your brushes, the surface you choose, the type of surface you work on, and three, the viscosity of the paint. So real quick, we'll start with brushes. I'm going to put three brushes out here in front. You'll see that I have a bristle on the left, a mongoose in the middle, and a synthetic on the right. And each of these brushes kind of carry a different trait of application of paint. I prefer the bristle, especially on the type of surface I use, and we'll get into that in a minute, because it allows my paint to kind of get into the groove or the stipple of the canvas or linen. The mongoose is a really fine hairbrush that works best if you're working on a very smooth surface, okay? Because those little hairs aren't really bristly or stiff enough to get paint down into the grooves of your canvas, especially if you're using something like a cotton duck canvas, okay? The synthetic is kind of an in-betweener. It carries enough paint, it just doesn't have the very brisk stroke that you see where it leaves ridge lines within the paint stroke. So those are the reasons why you use these three brushes, the different kinds. Like I said, I prefer the bristle most. That's why you can see it's the most used. The thing to consider too is this is just hair on the end of a stick, right? I mean, that's really what we're applying paint with. And in applying paint, we'll go over this later, is how we use the hairs of that brush make a difference on your mark making on the surface of the canvas. Okay, let's jump to the canvas next. So the canvas, I use three kinds. I'll use a linen. I prefer Clausen's, but I use a linen from time to time. And in those linens, you have like a portrait weave and a landscape weave. The landscape weave gives you a little bit more opportunity to use texture and scumbling on the paint, which we'll try here in a minute. And then I also prep sometimes my own masonite boards where I use Gamblin's oil-based primer, and I can prepare a surface that I like or experiment on something I want to try, and that gives me a little freedom there. And last is I use old paintings that I don't like or weren't quite finished. I can actually use that same oil ground to apply over the paint once it's dry, and that's what you see here. You'll see there's a little bit of color from another painting underneath showing through, and I don't mind that because I'm going to be covering the paint under ground pretty much thoroughly. So, and when you use that paint, I'll sand it just a hair, break down some of the big ridges, and then I put that oil base on, and it gives me an opportunity to have a little bit of texture and some leftover brush strokes from a previous painting. It gives me a little variety in my surface. So now let's jump to paint. And that's kind of the one I want to talk about most because it's how we're going to be using the paint, how we're going to be pushing it around, okay? So the first initial thing I'll do is I'll put down a wash, okay? And that wash, I'm going to just dip into some terp, okay? And just a little bit, not a ton. If I use too much, in fact, let's do that. I'll do a little bit too much. If I just grab a random color, I know you guys can't see my palette, but I'm just going to grab like a transparent oxide red and a little bit of Viridian. So it's kind of a gray brown, and I'm going to get it really wet, okay? And now I can apply this like this, which most people do. They pull the stroke, okay? But in a wet situation like this, it's just going to run. So you can apply it however you want. In fact, you can come up and even add a little bit more if you wanted to. You can let it drip through, and we'll see what that does. Let's let it play out and dry. It may not be dry enough at the end here, but we'll let it sit so I can come back to it. So that will give you a really, really runny wash, and you've got to let it set up before you paint over it. Otherwise, you're just going to be painting into a soup. The second viscosity would be to use that same, I'll use that same mixture, or mix up another batch of it. And this time I'm just going to touch a tiny bit of my terp. I'm talking just the tip of my brush. Sometimes I'll even touch it on my paper towel after. So it's wet and slick, see, and it moves, but it stays very transparent, okay, but it's not runny, okay? And so that's good when you want to, lay in an underground, wash, if you want to cover your painting in a certain color or wash, okay? Now, the next would be your standard paint, and that would be just to mix up, quite a bit more paint. I kind of think of it as 4 stages. This is kind of the normal stage, and then there's the really, really opaque where you're putting it on with absolute gusto, and the paint's so thick it's like scooping goo on the end of your brush. Okay, so this is a more natural way of painting. And see how it doesn't let the canvas show through? It's more a little bit more of an opaque approach. Okay, and even when I scrub it, it doesn't actually want to go back down to the canvas like this thinner wash did. So just in those 3 stages, you can see the difference of the application of paint. Okay, and then lastly, let's do a really, really juicy kind of thick paint. I'm going to add a lot here, so give me a second. And I put a little bit of white in it in the last 2 mixtures, so that's why it's showing up a little bit different color, because I added white to them. Okay, and so now I can actually load the brush, where now I've got, see how much paint? It's tons. It's not even letting the canvas show through at all. Can you see that? Okay, so you have to just know how this paint reacts when you put it on your canvas. Okay, the thing I want to cover with this is how we apply paint. So I'll stick with that same pile, because it's kind of, I've used up most of it now. It's kind of back to this normal stage. I think everybody, when we all start painting, we all kind of do this. We want to pull the drawing. I'm going to draw this here, and I'm going to draw that there, and this goes right here. We kind of do a lot of pulling with the brush. What's interesting is you don't always have to pull. You can push, right? It gives me a completely different texture and feel when I push. I actually use this quite a bit. I load up the brush, and I use the side. So basically the height from here to here is the width of my brush, which is wider than this way, right? This is a much wider stroke. So I'll actually load the brush, and I'll use the side of the brush either this way or this way. Okay, I can use the side of it, and it gives a nice kind of textural sweep at times. Sometimes I actually roll the brush. This gives you an effect too. You can roll the brush to get this kind of undulated, unique application. It's very organic, right? Like when you do bushes and stuff, I don't have to sit there and paint a bush. I can give the texture of the bush, right? Then go and identify my, the details that I need to create that bush. Okay. So what I'm just trying to get you to think about is that we don't always have to pull the brush. We can push it. We can move it sideways. We can scrub it, right? What's interesting too is with our pigments and surface, we can use a paper towel as well. So if I come in fact, let's go in between her. If I scrub this down with a paper towel, right, I'm basically leaving a very thin surface of paint like I did here, but I'm rubbing it into the canvas and picking up what's left over, okay? So I want you guys to think about how you're putting down paint. Whoops, told you I'd bump into that. How you apply paint makes a difference, because what happens is we get very, very monotonous when we end up, give me a second, I'm mixing up more paint. When we start doing this everywhere in the painting, we pull, and look what happens. It starts to get very monotonous, okay? And so we want to create variety in the actual application of paint, okay? So think about that. You've got a mass. Why not mass it in here and then come in and maybe pull this one off the end here and allow this one to pull. Maybe I can push over here, right? So I can give a lot of variety in the way I put down paint instead of always just pulling and pulling. And I know drawing is a big deal. We all worry about the drawing's got to be right. And that comes with, in the beginning, we're trying to draw with the brush. But when you get to the point where you're seeing, like I always say, see optically, you're seeing a shape instead of a thing. I can take that shape and I can create the shape in any way I want with the brush, and then come in and refine it or put detail or whatever. It just gives a little bit more uniqueness, so that when the viewer looks at the painting, they go, wow, how was that done? It gives it a little bit more organic feel, especially in landscape, okay? So I want you to experiment on whether the brush goes this way or flat. It gives you two different effects, okay? Think about that. Sometimes I'll load up the brush even and do this. I'll kind of load it up with a little bit of terp, and I'll kind of push and allow the paint, didn't work. I'll allow the paint to kind of get wet at the furrow, and look what that does. Sometimes it'll actually, if I get enough on there, sometimes it'll start to kind of drop and pool up here, and give you almost kind of a watercolor look. So like I said, I want you guys to play around with the way you apply paint. And I've done, when I was in school, I did tons of these panels just exploring with what paint does on what type of canvas, what the texture does. You can see this wash as it dries. It dries very flat. If I had a textural board, you can see here, really, if you look close, I don't know if you can see it, but there's little granulars that fall in the texture of the canvas. If I have a very textural canvas and I do this same approach, a lot of those that granular look, the grains will show up in the wash almost like a watercolor. So again, you're figuring out what this pigment does on the surface that you use and with the viscosity and the brushes. And there's so much variety in this world when it comes to putting down paint. Okay, so now with that, let's talk about the next step, and that would be, what do I do on top of this? Everybody gets a little stuck on working on top of paint that's already down. The catch is you have to always load more paint on top of the underground surface. So as you work, you get more and more and more opaque. Okay, and if you don't, then you're going to be in a world of hurt, because every time you add a color underneath, it's going to pick up that other color underneath. It also deals with how you put down the stroke, the amount of pressure, the angle of the brush, all those things also come into account. So just for fun, let's mix up kind of I'll mix up a bright red kind of paint here. My red's a little bit stiff, so I'm going to add a little bit of the ochre to it to kind of soften it up a little bit. So it's kind of a pinky, orangey color. So as I come in, if I come in and I have a pretty good loaded brush, not tons of paint, just kind of like this normal stage. If I come in, say on here, and I push, I'm pretty okay. If I start to do this though, look what happens. And the more times I push over it, the more it pulls up this tone underneath. Let's go over this one. Especially going to happen here. The more I do that, the more it picks up. And on this very thick stuff, you're really going to see it. So as soon as I pull down, look at that. It just wants to merge with the paint underneath. So I know here I have to be, again, extra, extra thick. The advantage of the one on the far left there is a wash is, guess what? If it's dry enough, see, it doesn't pick up. I can scumble and use the scumbling effect. Let me go a little darker so you can see it. I can get a scumbling effect where it doesn't pick up the tone underneath. Okay, if I wet it, it will, but if I stay dry, that pigment will fall down. It won't fall down in the cracks and get mixed in. Okay, it'll stay up on top. And there's reasons for that. Sometimes you want the texture to show up, and so therefore you load it up so that you can get the texture. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm mixing up a pretty opaque brush stroke for this far right one. I'm going to show you on the end of my brush how much paint. Can you see that? There's a lot of paint on the end of that. Okay, and so when I come over, if I take the brush like this and I push, it's going to mix. The end of the hairs are going to push into the paint and mix. Okay, same thing. If I do it this way, same thing. It's going to mix. See that? But if I load the brush, again, a whole bunch, and I lay the brush absolutely, horizontal to the surface of the canvas, and I pull, look what happens. It stays up on top. So it's about the way you put down paint. Anytime I do that, look at how the paint will stay on top if I've got a very light touch. You can see my hand over here. I'm holding it very, very lightly. Okay, and that helps me stay up on top and scumble. Okay, if I want to mix those two, then that's great, because there's advantages of having opaque paint and having more opaque. I can come in here and I can blend those so that I've got enough paint that, look, it starts to blend in this beautiful kind of stage of kind of brown to a white pink. I can blend that because I've got enough paint to allow it to mix. Now, the same thing happens when I do things like this. If I push on here, it's not picking up, because remember I rubbed this in. It's kind of working like this because it's very, very thin layer of paint. So I can push and scrub. If I push and scrub on this, it's going to pick up that paint underneath. See? Even so on the, even more so over here. If I push, it's really going to pick up what's underneath and mix them together. Okay? So knowing that, I can say, I want a soft edge. I can push this paint, this opaque paint, away instead of pulling it, I can push it, and it basically pushes into the under layer of paint and allows it to almost be a broken, soft split edge. So again, this is something that, you guys take some time and explore. I've done, I would say, several dozen panels of trying different ways on how paint reacts, and I test it and see what does it do and how does it work, and what happens if I do a wash on this, and what does the texture look like, so that I know when I approach a painting, I kind of know, how the paint is going to interact, and depending on what brush. For example, I'm going to pull this little guy. Okay, let's get him loaded up. I'll make him a bright kind of a green color. Let's try that. And I'm kind of running out of white paint here, so give me a second. And you'll find that you really have to load these little brushes a lot, because they don't carry, those hairs don't carry a lot of paint. They're great for washes like this. That's why I say for a thin, smooth linen canvas, it works great. The thing about these is these can stay up top a lot better. It's so soft, you can't see that. It's so soft that look at how it barely scumbles. Even on the thick paint, if I load it, it does the same thing, right? It just skips. And so it has a beautiful effect when you use it, right? If I push, it's going to use a lot more of that kind of mixing idea that we talked about up here on this one. It's just so soft that it almost automatically blends the two shapes together. And of course, that's what this is mostly. I would use this mostly is for edges, right? Because I can come in and I can soften an edge so softly that it creates a broken edge, so that the paint, looks like a soft edge, or looks like almost like hair or fur. So I just wanted to cover that this month, because I'm noticing, just a few paintings that everybody's kind of pulling the same repetitive motion, same size brush, same size pull. We want to try to add variety not only to our asymmetry and our design and application, but even in the application of the paint itself. We want it to be a little bit more interesting and kind of fun to look at. Okay, so with that, I'll do one last one just for fun, because it's the very end. If I put a wash on top, let's try a really wet wash. I'll show you how wet this is. See how wet that is? It's very wet. I'll even do it more so. If I put it over here, I can almost get two washes to kind of play together. If I do that same thing over here, it's not going to give me the same effect, because I'm wet on wet, and that wet's going to pick up underneath. See that? It just picks up the paint underneath instead of staying on top. So again, that's an advantage later on. If I don't want the opaque paint to be so crisp, I can put a wet layer on top and allow them to blend. Okay? All right. So with that, I hope that helps, guys, in your application of paint. Explore, like I said, try different canvases, try different brushes, try the viscosity and thickness of your paint. And it's almost like playing the scales. You're just, there's no rhyme or reason why you do this. You're just trying to figure out how things work. And once you understand the scales, like Miles Davis said, when it comes to painting, you just forget it and let it flow. And you'll find that when you understand this kind of paint, it comes second nature as you apply your paint on what you need, whether you need it thin or thick, etc. Okay. Hi. My name is Mitch Baird, and I'm over the moon about working with you. What an opportunity. 365 days to work at your own pace, receive personal feedback, and have access to a community of growing artists. That's invaluable. Aesthetics and the art of picture making is a lifelong pursuit, full of questions and stumbling blocks, but it's also full of wisdom and rewards. In the 25 years I've been painting and teaching, I've found that there is a crucial and particular way of seeing that every artist must grasp if they want to obtain wisdom. This visual perception is so important that it will be the starting point of this course. I will share with you visual tools that will strengthen your artistic eye, and that in turn will fortify your knowledge and creative abilities. There are also certain fundamentals that all artists must know and use in order to find rewards and create successful paintings. Composition is of the utmost importance, as it's the core of visual communication. I will share facets of design, arrangement, and keeping balance. Drawing will feature concepts on proportion, shape, and linear perspective, as they are the forces behind two-dimensional and three-dimensional space. The lessons on value will present insights on how to see values clearly and how the form principle affects everything in our visual field. Lastly, I will cover color, the final frontier in an artist's exploration. I will share the aspects of building a solid foundation on how to see and identify color, as well as mix it and use it with harmony. No matter your level of experience, the information shared in this course will elevate your understanding and will assist you in your search for excellence. I look forward to helping you along in your journey, as well as sharing mine with you too.